Chapter 7. The Exchange of Ideas. We are at the end of the second millennium BC now, and for several centuries, there has been a steady flow of copper and other goods traveling up the coast from Mesoamerica into the American Southwest. But what if that's not all that was being traded? What if ideas were also traveling north alongside the goods? Ideas about religion and cosmology and urban design. And what if those ideas took root and flourished in ways that changed the course of North American prehistory? That's what we're going to explore today on this channel. It's me. Welcome to the series Ancient North America. The Mississippian culture emerged in the American bottom around 800 AD, but it quickly spread outward across the lowlands of the Mississippi River and its tributaries. By 1000 AD, it had become one of the largest, most widespread and densely populated cultures in pre-Columbian North America. Their political units called chiefdoms contained anywhere from 500 to several thousand people and were ruled over by a hereditary elite, who monopolized access to resources and directed labor into monumental construction projects, like the Great Platform Mound at Cahokia, which rose 100 feet, or 30 meters high, with a flat summit, that could be used for ball games, religious ceremonies, or as a base for elite residences. But while archaeologists have been able to document many aspects of Mississippian life, including their impressive knowledge of astronomy, their social organization, and even some details of their religious beliefs, it's as hard to know exactly where these ideas came from. Because despite the ubiquity of the Mississippian culture, their written language is completely undeciphered, and thus their historical records are a mystery. However, their material culture shows clear signs of having traveled south from Mexico. For example, the iconic ceramic vessel of the Mississippian culture is the effigy bowl, a large earthenware pot shaped like an animal's head. The earliest examples are from the Puebla, Panuco region of Mexico, dating back to 400 BC, but later examples from the classic Maya period show a much wider range of effigy forms, especially birds and fantastic creatures with elongated snouts and multiple sets of appendages. And suddenly those same fantastic creatures start appearing on Mississippian effigy bowls, starting around 800 AD, just after the classic Maya civilization collapsed. This makes it seem likely that Mississippian artists either migrated to the south and picked up the style directly from Maya potters, or that Mississippian potters got the idea from Maya ceramics, circulating in trade. Either way, there is no way that they would have come up with such an advanced and sophisticated style independently, without having seen the ceramics that inspired them. But that's not the only piece of evidence pointing to a southern origin for the Mississippian culture. We can also see the influence of classic Maya architecture in the design of their platform mounds, which served multiple functions in Mississippian society, just as they did in the Maya. For example, at Angel Mounds, the principal mound rises behind a wide stairway that leads up onto a flat summit. In both cases, the stairway is offset to one side of the structure, so that it appears to be floating on the mound, like a raft on water. But the similarities go deeper than that, because when archaeologists excavated the mound at Angel, they found that the stairway was deliberately placed to align with the cardinal directions. And just as in the Maya, the platform mound was surrounded by 4 subsidiary mounds that formed a square around it, creating a sacred precinct aligned with the constellation of the Milky Way. And speaking of the cosmos, the Maya were expert astronomers who kept detailed records of comets and other celestial visitors. They even used their knowledge of the skies to predict the movements of the planets, Venus in particular. And many archaeologists believe that they passed on this knowledge to the people of the American bottom when they migrated north. If true, then the Maya would not be the only Mesoamerican culture to influence North American religious practices. The Hopewell culture flourished in the Ohio River Valley from about 200 BC to 500 AD, and it's best known for the geometric earthworks that they built across the landscape. Some, like the Great Circle at Newark earthworks, were clearly used for astronomical observation, and others, like the Octagon at the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, were probably used for religious rituals. But while their structures look impressive, there's nothing particularly unique or mysterious about them. They aren't pyramids, and they weren't built by an unknown people who vanished. The Hopewell people themselves constructed them as part of a long-lasting tradition of mound building that goes back thousands of years in North America. What is more mysterious is the sudden appearance of Hopewell material culture in the archaeological record, because their distinctive pottery, jewelry, and other artifacts show clear signs of having traveled south from Mesoamerica. For example, the distinctive shell-tempered pottery of the Hopewell culture has clear parallels with ceramics from the Mexican state of Puebla, which archaeologists date to the same time period. And this is important because it shows that Mesoamerican cultural influence was present in the Ohio Valley before the Maya even existed. So it seems likely that whatever cultural group was living in the Ohio Valley at the time was directly descended from the Maya, but instead had independently adopted many of their religious ideas through trade and cultural exchange. This is supported by the discovery of Maya-style polychrome ceramics in Florida, Georgia, and even Illinois, indicating that Mesoamerican goods traveled far and wide across North America. And when archaeologists discovered Hopewell-style artifacts in the Maya city of Tikal, it seemed clear that the two cultures had been directly connected through trade. But it's hard to say exactly what was exchanged. Was it ideas, goods, people, or all three? Well, recently, a team of archaeologists investigated this question by analyzing the chemical composition of the clay used in Hopewell ceramics. They wanted to see if the clay was locally sourced, or if it had been imported from somewhere else. And what they found was that the clay used in Hopewell ceramics was almost identical to the clay found in the Puebla Panuco region of Mexico, indicating that the material was imported south to North America rather than being locally sourced. But this doesn't tell us why. Why would the Maya send so much clay to North America? Well, perhaps it was simply an unintended consequence of trade. After all, the main reason that the Maya would have been trading with northern cultures would be to acquire exotic goods like obsidian and copper, which were not available in Mesoamerica. And if those goods were being transported on boats down the coast, then it's likely that some clay would have been inadvertently brought along for the ride. However, it's possible that the presence of Maya traders in North America is evidence of something more deliberate, like an attempt to convert northern cultures to Maya religion. And this wouldn't be unprecedented in Mesoamerica. For example, the classic Maya expanded rapidly during the late pre-classic period, which saw a dramatic increase in population, trade, and cultural influence. And archaeologists think that this growth may have been driven in part by the adoption of the Maya writing system by neighboring cultures. So it's not inconceivable that Maya merchants traveling to the north would have tried to convert local populations to their religion in exchange for raw materials. And that would explain why certain religious ideas from Mesoamerica took root so easily in the north. There was already a cultural infrastructure in place to support them. But ultimately, we can't really know the motivations of ancient traders, unless we can decipher their writing system, which we can't. So we can only speculate. In the end, it seems likely that ideas flowed across the landscape of ancient North America in much the same way that they do today. Like water, ideas find the easiest path to flow along. They travel most quickly when they're carried on a well-established trade route, and they spread most easily when they're adapted to local conditions. Just think of all the languages that exist in the world today that are descended from Proto-Indo-European, the common ancestor of modern English: Hindi, Spanish, Latin, and Russian. Over the past few millennia, speakers of Proto-Indo-European migrated across Eurasia and eventually gave rise to hundreds of different languages that vary widely from one another. But they all share a common origin. And in the same way, the religious beliefs and architectural traditions of Mesoamerica found fertile ground in the American South and eventually took on new life in North America. And while we will never know exactly how this happened, the evidence is clear that this kind of cultural exchange was a normal feature of pre-Columbian life in the Americas. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let me know what you thought. And if you want to learn more about ancient North America, click here to grab a copy of The First Americans, a book that explores the fascinating evidence for an earlier and more complex prehistory in North America than many people realize. Picture it, if you will. The year is 250 AD. You are a merchant traveling through the ancient city of Tikal in the Maya lowlands of Mesoamerica. The great stepped pyramids reach up to the sky. The air thrums with the sounds of merchants hawking their wares. Children playing, priests chanting, nobles discussing the latest ball game scores. There's even the distant rumble of a jaguar or two, making their presence known in the bustling marketplace. And you are here because there is money to be made, goods to be traded. But not only are you a world away from your home, you're also a world away from everything you know and understand. Here, the buildings aren't made of wood and stone like back home, but of massive blocks of solid limestone. Instead of maize, the staple food is a strange fruit that grows wild in these parts, called, well, that doesn't matter. And instead of the familiar faces of your fellow merchants, here the people look different. Their skin tones vary from the palest white to the deepest black. Their clothing is colorful, their jewelry gaudy, and they speak in a language that sounds like the buzzing of insects. You try to get your bearings. How did you get here? Well, you traveled north. That much you know. But just how far north? That, dear viewer, is today's big question. Because while we know for a fact that the Maya did indeed make it into the modern southwestern United States, we don't know how far north they got. And that is the quiet mystery that stretches across the desert sands like an unanswerable riddle. Welcome, everyone, to this new series, The Pre-Columbian Americans. Today, Chapter 1, A Quiet Mystery Across the Desert. Now, before we set out across the desert in search of answers, I wanted to mention a few things. For one, this is not going to be a story of conquest and war. If you're looking for that, you might want to check out the channel. Here we will be focusing on the stories of those who traded, traveled, and otherwise exchanged culture, ideas, and goods. In short, the peaceful side of pre-Columbian America. Second, I need to confess something. I am no archaeologist or anthropologist. I am simply a lover of history who has been fascinated by the ancient Americas since stumbling across National Geographic specials about the subject as a kid. So if you notice anything factually incorrect, please let me know in the comments below. And finally, we would love it if you could support us by liking and subscribing, so that more people discover this amazing history. Okay, now that we've established all that, let's go exploring. Picture yourself stepping out of your time portal and walking down the dusty road. Except there is no road. This is the Maya lowlands, after all. There are no paved roads, no street signs, no traffic lights. Just jungle, secondary forest, overgrown fields, and of course, ruins. Ah, yes, the ruins. In order to understand the mystery that is the northernmost extent of Maya civilization, we must first talk about the Maya themselves. Now, I cannot possibly hope to cover everything there is to know about this vast and varied culture in a single video. Nor would that even be fair to the Maya people, whose cultures continue to thrive today, so I will simply cover what you need to know for this story to make sense. First, the Maya were not a single people, but many. They were, however, united by a common language and writing system, as well as by the calendar and ritual practices of the classic Maya. Second, the Maya lived all over, well, this, which I learned is called Mesoamerica. It includes parts of what is today Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Honduras. And third, and perhaps most important for this story, was the fact that the Maya were traders. The Maya lowlands, where our story begins, was and still is a place of thick, wet jungles. The environment is hot, humid, dark, buggy, and home to all manner of predators. While the soil is rich and fertile, it does not offer much in the way of resources beyond food. If you were living in the Maya lowlands, you would have had to get your obsidian, copper bells, salt, cacao, cotton, feathers, and luxury items like jade from somewhere else. In other words, you would have had to trade. Now, trading partners can be hard to come by if you live deep in the jungle, so the Maya tended to settle near raised natural features like the Itza, a large limestone ridge running along the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Here, in this open space between the jungle and the sea, Maya merchants could meet with neighboring merchants from the west, south, and east. But if you really wanted to get into the trading game, you needed to be willing to go farther afield. Up into the rugged mountains, to the west, across the swamplands, to the south, or even up north into the desert. And it is this journey north that brings us to the first big mystery of this series. Because while we know the Maya ventured into the desert, we don't know how far north they got. Before we attempt to solve this mystery, however, I should probably describe the land they were traveling into. Because the desert is hardly a hospitable place. Today, the Sonoran, Chihuahuan, and Mojave deserts cover much of the southwestern United States and extend south into Mexico. They are characterized by dry, hot summers, mild winters, and an almost complete lack of rain. Cactus dot the landscape, and only the hardiest of shrubs dare grow here. In short, it's not much of a place to live. But to a trader, well, the desert holds plenty of value. For one thing, there's precious metals to be had. Gold and silver are relatively easy to find in these parts, especially around the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument in southern Arizona, which happens to be at the very northern edge of the Maya cultural sphere. Then there's the Hohokam, the indigenous people of the region. These folks were pretty good at farming in the desert. Thank you very much. They created an extensive canal system that allowed them to water crops and sustain a population of around 40,000 people. But they didn't have metal tools, so they'd be more than happy to trade some of their ceramics and baskets for some shiny metal tools from the north. Finally, there's the nearby mountains, full of timber and precious minerals, and enough game to sustain hunters for years. What's more, the mountains are full of caves, and the caves are full of bats. And bats, as you probably already know, are excellent sources of guano, which is, well, you see where I'm going with this. The desert may not have much vegetation, but it is rich in tradable goods. And that means there was money to be made. So let's say you're a Maya merchant brave enough to head into the desert. How would you get there? Well, thankfully, you don't need to worry about that, because someone has already done the hard work of mapping out a route. See, archaeologists have found evidence of a trade route stretching from the Maya lowlands through central Mexico and into the southwestern United States. The route follows what is now called the Mogollon Rim, a large cliff that extends roughly north to south along the western side of New Mexico. According to archaeologists, this trade route was used as early as 300 AD, which would mean that Maya merchants would have arrived in New Mexico around the same time that Rome was sacking and burning the city. But wait, you say, surely the Maya didn't go that far north. After all, that's in the middle of nowhere. And you are right, the Maya wouldn't have gone there for fun. No, they went there for the same reason anyone ventures into the desert, for water. The Mogollon Rim is the edge of the Colorado Plateau, and along its edge are a number of springs, streams, and small lakes. In other words, water. And water means life. The Maya would have followed this trade route through central Mexico, then turned north at the Pecos River, and followed it all the way to its source, in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, which happen to be right at the edge of the Colorado Plateau. From here, the Maya could have continued north into present-day southern Colorado, following the Arkansas River, or they could have turned east and followed the Canadian River all the way to its mouth on the Gulf of Mexico. Both routes are around 800 miles long. Now, I know what you're thinking. Surely the Maya didn't travel 800 miles into the desert. And again, you are right. The Maya wouldn't have crossed the desert on foot. Instead, they would have traveled by boat. See, both the Pecos and Canadian rivers are navigable for most of their length, meaning the Maya could have traveled up them in canoes. Now, we don't know exactly how far north the Maya traveled. We do know that they reached the edge of the Colorado Plateau, and that puts their northernmost point somewhere in present-day southern Colorado, maybe even a little farther north. We also know that they made it to the modern American Southwest, sometime before 1450, when the last classic Maya city fell. So while we don't know exactly how far north the Maya traveled, we do know it was far. We also know that they did not conquer the native peoples they encountered, but rather traded with them. They were peaceful people who came in search of water and minerals, not soldiers looking to plunder and pillage. To the Maya, the desert may have seemed like an alien world, but they had a name for it, a name that roughly translates to the land of the strange waters. And that is fitting, because to the native peoples of the desert, the Maya must have seemed just as strange. People who came from the jungle bringing tales of great pyramids and talking priests. But despite their differences, the Maya and the natives of the desert found common ground in trade. The Maya brought with them jade, obsidian, salt, and textiles, while the desert peoples offered up pottery, baskets, pecans, and wood. But perhaps most important was water. To the Maya, water was life. Without it, their crops would wither and their cities would die. So when they encountered the native peoples of the desert, who knew how to farm in the most inhospitable of environments, they would have seen them as invaluable trading partners. In return, the Maya could offer things the desert peoples could not get for themselves, like jade, obsidian, and textiles. And that is the quiet mystery of the northern extent of Maya civilization. It is a story not of conquest and war, but of trade, travel, and cultural exchange. A story of two vastly different cultures who found common ground in the desert sands. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe so that more people discover this amazing history. And until next time, stay curious, everyone. Stay curious. This is Chapter 2 of our crash course in world history. If you missed Part 1, go check it out because we're going to be talking about the Maya today. And if you want to follow along with this chapter, you can head on over to our website for a study guide that will help you get an A+ in your class and a 5 on your exam. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an exciting episode. Okay, let's dive right into the chapter. The Maya people flourished in Mesoamerica from about 2000 BCE until the 16th century CE. At their height, they built some of the greatest cities in the ancient world, including Tikal, Uxmal, and Palenque, which were home to magnificent pyramids, palaces, and temples. They developed a sophisticated writing system and calendar, keeping meticulous records of their history and tracking the movements of celestial bodies with astonishing accuracy. But despite their many accomplishments, most of what we know about the Maya comes from a few sources, including Spanish colonial records from the 16th century. These accounts describe a society on the brink of collapse, one that was vastly different from the powerful civilization that had come before. When Europeans first arrived in the Americas, the Maya had been living in the Yucatan Peninsula for thousands of years. By 1500, they had established large city-states, each ruled by a king who claimed to be the descendant of the gods. But the Maya kings were not the only ones who believed they were divine. In fact, every member of Maya society saw themselves as connected to the supernatural, whether they were farmers, merchants, or rulers. The Maya believed that everything in the universe was animated by spiritual forces, and they sought to live in harmony with these forces to ensure their well-being. The Maya were located in a particularly hospitable part of the world. Their territory stretched across what is now southeastern Mexico, all of Guatemala, and parts of Belize and Honduras. It included both coastal lowlands and inland jungles, as well as mountains and rainforests. The lowlands were ideal for growing crops like maize, or corn, beans, and squash. Meanwhile, the forests were rich in game and natural resources like wood and stone. Now, this abundance did not mean that life was easy. Droughts and floods were common, and the Maya had to learn to adapt to these natural disasters. But overall, their environment was relatively stable and predictable, which allowed them to thrive. Around 2000 BCE, the Maya began to clear the forests and plant crops, and soon they were living in small villages. As the population grew, so did the size of their settlements, and by 1000 BCE, the Maya were living in cities. Their cities were not like those of the ancient Greeks or Romans, but rather consisted of a series of small neighborhoods surrounded by agricultural land. Each neighborhood was made up of several buildings, including houses, workshops, and temples. The Maya were not a monolithic civilization, meaning there wasn't one big empire that controlled everything. Instead, the Maya were made up of independent city-states that were constantly competing with each other. Sometimes they would form alliances against a common enemy, but just as often they would be at war. This constant state of flux meant that the Maya were always innovating and trying to improve their military technology. For example, they were among the first Mesoamerican societies to develop the concept of zero. They also kept detailed records of their history and used these records to plan for the future. The Maya were not only innovative in their approach to warfare, but also in their everyday lives. They developed a sophisticated system of agriculture that allowed them to grow food on a large scale. They also kept bees and raised turkeys and dogs. In addition to farming and herding, the Maya also engaged in trade. They traded goods both within their own territory and with other civilizations, such as the Aztecs and the Inca. Some of the items they traded included cacao beans, obsidian, jade, and feathers. The Maya also traded ideas and innovations, and they played a significant role in the spread of maize agriculture throughout Mesoamerica. Trade was vital to Maya life, because it provided them with the resources they needed to survive and thrive. They traded a variety of goods, including food, tools, and luxury items. One of the most important commodities they traded was cacao beans. The Maya cultivated cacao trees in the tropical lowlands and processed the beans into a bitter drink that was consumed during religious ceremonies and special occasions. They also traded obsidian, a hard, sharp volcanic glass that was used to make tools and weapons. The Maya acquired obsidian from distant sources, such as the western highlands of Guatemala and the eastern highlands of Mexico. Jade, another valuable commodity, was prized by the Maya for its beauty and durability. They used it to make jewelry, statues, and other ornaments. The Maya acquired jade through trade networks that extended as far away as the Pacific coast of Costa Rica. In addition to these materials, the Maya also traded feathers, which they used to decorate their clothing and adorn their headdresses. They obtained feathers from birds that they hunted or from merchants who traveled to distant lands to acquire them. The Maya also produced textiles, including cotton and hemp cloth, which they traded with other societies. Overall, trade was essential to the Maya economy and culture, providing them with the goods and resources they needed to sustain their way of life. And while these are some of the goods they traded, we should note that the Maya also traded ideas, religion, and cultural practices. For instance, the Maya shared their knowledge of agriculture with other Mesoamerican societies, including the Aztecs and the Inca. They also exchanged religious beliefs and rituals with their neighbors. and they influenced the art and architecture of other cultures through their skilled craftsmanship and innovative designs. In fact, the Maya were highly skilled craftspeople who excelled in a variety of artistic and technological pursuits. They were skilled in the arts of weaving, pottery, sculpture, and metalwork. They created beautiful textiles, ceramics, sculptures, and ornaments that were highly prized by other cultures. We should also mention that the Maya were not just traders and craftspeople, but also warriors. They were known for their fierce independence and their willingness to defend their territory against outside invaders. They were skilled fighters who used a variety of weapons, including spears, bows and arrows, and obsidian-tipped clubs. So as you can see, the Maya were a complex and multifaceted civilization, with a rich culture and a deep connection to the natural world around them. They were not just traders, but also farmers, craftspeople, and warriors. And their influence extended far beyond their own borders. Now, you might be wondering why trade mattered so much to the Maya. After all, trade is usually about making money. And while the Maya did value certain objects above others, and would use that value to gain power, prestige, and wealth, trade was not only an economic necessity for them, but a spiritual one as well. For the Maya, trade was more than just an economic activity. It was a way of connecting with the supernatural. They believed that the gods were present in the natural world around them, and that they could access the divine through their interactions with other people. In fact, the Maya viewed trade as a form of reciprocity, a way of giving back to the gods for their blessings. They believed that by trading fairly and honestly, they could maintain the balance of the universe and ensure the continuation of their way of life. The Maya also believed that certain objects had spiritual power. They valued jade, for example, because they believed it was a sacred stone that could connect them to the underworld. They also prized cacao beans, because they were associated with the god of rain. By trading for these objects, the Maya were able to bring the gods into their everyday lives. In addition to their economic and spiritual importance, trade was also a way for the Maya to express their creativity and ingenuity. They were skilled craftspeople who took great pride in their work. They used their knowledge of local materials and their understanding of the needs of their customers to create beautiful and functional objects. They also developed sophisticated systems for organizing trade and keeping track of accounts. This required a high level of numeracy and record-keeping skills. Overall, trade was a central part of Maya life. It was an economic necessity, a spiritual practice, and a way of expressing their creativity. The Maya were highly skilled traders who valued fairness, honesty, and reciprocity. They understood the importance of giving back to the gods, and they believed that, by doing so, they could maintain the balance of the universe and ensure the continuation of their way of life. Okay, click here to review key terms from this chapter, or click here to keep studying. Thanks for watching. Alright, Chapter 3, let's do it. So the Maya were masters at getting what they wanted from the environment. And they were also masters at getting what they wanted from their neighbors. Now we're gonna explore what the Maya traded, how they moved those goods, and why they weren't always the ones making direct contact with other societies. Now the Maya certainly traded within their own civilization. We know that because we've seen the kinds of goods found in burials across the Maya area from the classic period. And when archaeologists find these goods, they can often tell where they came from just by looking at the style or the raw materials. Like here in this burial at Uzmal, we have an exquisite jade head pendant with the face of a deity carved on it. But the interesting thing about this is that while the Maya were expert lapidaries, that is, stonecutters, they weren't known for their jade work. The finest Maya jade work was actually done by the neighboring Cache Maya, further to the west, in what is now Guatemala. So this piece must have been imported, probably by the person's family prior to their death. And since it comes from a burial, it must have been important. So what's important about this jade pendant? Well, the materials are important because jade was a very rare material for the Maya, and they went to great lengths to get it. Another interesting example is this black obsidian mirror from the Maya site of Palenque. Obsidian is volcanic glass that forms when lava cools really quickly. So quickly that it doesn't have time to form crystals like regular igneous rocks. And this results in a glassy smooth texture that was prized by the ancient world for making mirrors and sharp tools. Obsidian was actually pretty easy to come by in the general area, but it had to be carefully selected and then flaked and polished just right to make a good mirror. So this mirror would have been made by an expert craftsman, probably in a workshop where mirrors were mass-produced for export. And if you were a wealthy enough Maya, you might have one of these mirrors in your house. used for cosmetic purposes, or maybe even religious rituals. So both of these items had to be imported into this particular burial, but they weren't necessarily brought there directly by the people who made them. Instead, there was probably a middleman involved who bought these goods in their home city, brought them to another city where he could sell them for a profit, and eventually the goods ended up in this tomb. That's called trade, and it's just one way the Maya moved their goods around. The easiest way to move goods was by traveling downriver. While the Maya never developed ocean-going ships, they were masterful at building canoes and navigating the waterways of the lowlands. Even today, the rivers of the Yucatan and the lowlands are the primary way to get around. And that was true back then too. Most of the major Maya cities were located along river systems which drained into the larger Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico basins. So trade goods from the Pacific side of the Maya realm would end up here, too, flowing into the Matagua River and eventually the Caribbean. In fact, the Matagua River served as the western terminus for the great trade route known as the Meridian Road. The Meridian Road is famous because it connected the Maya directly to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, a distance of over 600 miles. This road ran east across the Yucatan Peninsula, through what is now Belize City, then turned north, and cut through the center of the modern Mexican state of Puebla, before arriving at Tenochtitlan. It's called the Meridian Road because it was roughly aligned with the sun's position at noon in the sky during the spring and fall equinoxes, which occurred in the middle of the Classic period, 250 to 900 AD. There's some debate about exactly when this road was built, but it was clearly in use by the late Classic period, and possibly even earlier. It seems to have been maintained by merchants from both the Maya and the Mexica, and its purpose was to facilitate trade between the two regions. And that means that merchants traveled the length of Mesoamerica on this road. On the Maya side, they likely started out in the city of Quirigua, which sits right on the Matagua River, but may have also set off from nearby Izabal, which had a port on the Caribbean. From there, they headed east across the Yucatan, passing through several important cities along the way. The first was Tikal, the largest and arguably most powerful Maya city in the eastern lowlands. Then they would pass through the trading hub of El Pilar, which straddled the border between the Maya kingdoms of Tikal and the Quiche Maya. Further to the east, the road passed through the city of Lamoni, which acted as a buffer state between the Maya and the rising power of the Itza Maya kingdom of Chichen Itza, and it was probably at Lamoni where merchants made the transition from the familiar tropical lowlands into the more arid hills and valleys of northern Yucatan. Now once they reached the middle of the Yucatan, the road turned north towards the modern Mexican city of Mérida. From there, travelers continued inland toward Puebla and finally reached Tenochtitlan. The journey took about 3 weeks each way, and it was fraught with danger. The road passed through areas inhabited by various indigenous peoples who were often hostile to outsiders. And besides, the travelers had to contend with bandits and wild animals. But the rewards could be great for those brave enough to make the journey. The merchants of the Meridian Road traded many different goods, but they specialized in luxury items that were hard to come by in either region. For the Maya, obsidian, salt and cotton were all in high demand in Tenochtitlan, while cacao, incense, jade, feathers and wood carvings were highly prized in the Maya heartland. Slaves were also a common commodity in this trade network. And human sacrifice, well, it was practiced by both cultures, and captives from war could be put to work as forced laborers. But not all goods moved as far north as Tenochtitlan. Some goods moved farther north through middle. When the Maya traded with the Zapotec, the Mixtec, and the Nahuas, in what is now Oaxaca and Puebla, they did unnecessarily travel all the way to the coast to meet up with merchants coming from the west. Instead, they traded with middlemen who lived on the frontier, and who already knew how to work within the Mesoamerican market. For example, at the site of La Cobata, there is evidence of Maya merchants who dealt in obsidian, jade and rock crystal. These goods would have been too heavy to move across the highlands, so local craftsmen probably took the raw materials and worked them into finished goods themselves. And then these goods were sold to merchants from the west. So instead of traveling all the way to the coast, the Maya merchants met up with merchants from Oaxaca and Puebla at La Cobata and traded there. The Maya did trade with the Aztecs, but it wasn't always direct. The classic Maya never made it to the Valley of Mexico. They didn't even see the Pacific Ocean, but they were aware of the natural resources on the other side of the highlands, and they knew they could make a profit bringing them back to the lowlands. I hope you learned something about the far-flung trading contacts of the Maya today. If you want to learn more about pre Colombia and Mesoamerica. Stay tuned for more information. Next time we're gonna talk about the ball game. Until then, keep on trucking. As we continue our world tour of ancient cultures, we fly to the southwest corner of the United States and settle into Chapter 4, the ancient Southwest. Our first stop is Cacao Canyon in New Mexico. Here we meet the ancestors of the modern Pueblo people, known as the ancestral Pueblones, or Anasazi. Now that word Anasazi is actually Navajo for ancient people and the folks who live here today. Don't like it because they have a distinct culture from the Anasazi, even though they are related. So instead we'll call them the ancestral Pueblones, but feel free to call them the Anasazi if you prefer. The ancestral Pueblones were living in this area by about 550 CE, and at first they were just small bands of nomadic hunters and gatherers. But by 750, they had begun building permanent settlements and farming the land. By 900, they were thriving with over 10,000 people living in the Cacao Canyon area alone. These folks built great houses out of stone and cottonwood mortar. These great stone dwellings were multi-story apartment complexes made up of many rooms which could house multiple families. They farmed the land using dry farming techniques, and they raised maize, beans, and squash. To make up for the lack of rain, they also built acequias, which are irrigation canals that brought water from the rivers to their crops. They lived in a semi-arid environment, so they had to work hard to survive. But they were able to use the materials around them to build homes and tools. They used wood to build looms to weave baskets and pottery. And they used stone to build houses and jewelry. In fact, they were quite fond of jewelry, and their favorite gemstone was turquoise. They also had a vast network of trade routes that extended all the way to the Gulf of California. And while archaeologists haven't found any evidence of wheeled vehicles like wagons or carts, they have found traces of domesticated pack animals, possibly either dogs or llamas. The ancestral Pueblans didn't have metal tools, but they were very clever and they figured out how to get metals like copper and silver. They would find a natural deposit of metal, and then they would build a fire around it. And then they would let the fire burn low and slowly so that it would oxidize. This process would make the metal brittle, and then they could break it up and use it to make tools and jewelry. Now, while these folks were quite accomplished, they weren't the only ones. The ancestral Pueblones were living alongside the Mogollon culture to the south and the Hohokam culture to the west. The Mogollon folks also built great stone dwellings, but theirs were more like single-family homes rather than apartment complexes. And the Hohokam were masters of irrigation. They built a series of canals that stretched over 200 miles to bring water from the Salt and Gila rivers to their crops. The Hohokam were farmers, and they grew corn, beans, squash, and cotton. They also built ball courts, and were probably playing a game similar to modern lacrosse. But not to be left out, the ancestral Pueblans had their own ball court too. And the archaeological record shows that they were playing a ball game as early as 850 CE. All three of these cultures were living in the same area at the same time and interacting with each other through trade and warfare. The ancestral Pueblones excelled at pottery making. They crafted beautiful black on white and later red and buff pottery. Their style was highly distinctive, and some archaeologists have suggested that they might have been influenced by the Maya. That's right, the Maya. Why would the Maya have been down here? Well, stay tuned till next week and we'll find out. What else did the ancestral Pueblones excel at? Astronomy. They built great observatories atop the mesas overlooking the valleys. They used the stars to track the seasons and to predict when it would be time to plant or harvest their crops. They also built roads connecting these observatories so that they could easily travel between them and share their knowledge. We don't know exactly why the ancestral Pueblones stopped building their great stone houses, but we think it might have had something to do with climate change. Around 1280, the rains failed and the land became a desert. The ancestral Pueblones couldn't farm anymore, so they abandoned their homes and moved away. But they left behind a rich legacy of culture and history. And today the modern Pueblo people are keeping that legacy alive. Now, speaking of leaving legacies, I want to take a moment to invite you to become part of the legacy of this channel. We're so close to reaching our goal of 1 million subscribers, but we need your help. If you love what we're doing here, if you enjoy learning about history and geography from around the world, then please hit that subscribe button. It really helps us out and it helps us keep making great videos. Thank you so much for your support. Let's go back in time now to 300 BCE in Mesoamerica and meet the Maya. The Maya civilization flourished in the Yucatan Peninsula and parts of Central America. They were one of the most advanced civilizations of their time, and they excelled in mathematics, astronomy, and art. The Maya kept records, using a system of hieroglyphic writing. They developed a calendar that was remarkably accurate, and they built pyramids and temples to honor their gods. They were great astronomers, and they used their knowledge of the heavens to develop a sophisticated calendar system and to predict eclipses. They were also skilled mathematicians, and they developed a concept of zero before the rest of the world. They used this knowledge to develop a sophisticated number system and to make incredible astronomical calculations. The Maya were also great artists, and they expressed their creativity through their architecture, pottery, and murals. Their buildings were often decorated with intricate carvings, and their pottery was beautifully painted. They also created impressive works of art in the form of murals, which decorated the walls of their temples and palaces. Now, the Maya civilization was not just one city, but a collection of city-states that were constantly vying for power. They were ruled by kings, and they had a complex social hierarchy. The Maya were also great traders, and they had a vast network of trade routes that extended throughout Mesoamerica. They traded goods such as jade, obsidian, and cacao, and they also exchanged ideas and culture with other civilizations. The Maya were also known for their advanced agricultural practices. They developed innovative methods for planting and harvesting crops, and they also built irrigation systems to water their fields. They primarily grew maize, beans, squash, and tomatoes. The Maya were also skilled hunters, and they hunted animals such as deer, turkeys, and rabbits. Unfortunately, the Maya civilization declined around 900 CE, and we don't know exactly why this happened. But scholars believe that a combination of factors contributed to their decline, including drought, overpopulation, and warfare. Despite their decline, the Maya left behind a rich legacy of culture and history, and their descendants are still living in Central America today. Speaking of leaving legacies, I want to take a moment to thank our supporters for their contributions to this channel. Your generosity allows us to produce these videos for free for everyone, and we couldn't do it without you. If you would like to support us, please visit our support page. The Maya had a fascinating culture, and they believed in a number of gods and goddesses. Some of their most important deities included the feathered serpent god, Itzamna, who was the supreme creator god and the god of wisdom and knowledge, the rain god, who was responsible for providing water and fertility to the land, and the death god, who was associated with the underworld and the afterlife. The Maya practiced a religion that was polytheistic and animistic. They believed that the natural world was full of spirits, and they respected and revered all forms of life. The Maya also had a strong belief in the power of prophecy, and they consulted with priests and diviners to predict the future. The Maya built magnificent cities, and their architecture was truly impressive. They constructed pyramids, temples, and palaces that were adorned with intricate carvings and paintings. The Maya were also skilled engineers, and they built roads, bridges, and causeways that connected their cities and allowed for easy transportation. So there you have it, a brief overview of the ancient Maya and their fascinating culture. From their advanced mathematics and astronomy to their beautiful art and architecture, the Maya were truly a remarkable civilization. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Hi, it's me. Number 5. Turquoise. Turquoise is a beautiful blue-green stone that can be found today in Arizona and New Mexico. And because it was prized by many different cultures, it pops up all over the place in North America. The Hopi, the Zuni, and the Navajo all worked with turquoise in their jewelry. But even before those tribes were working with this lovely stone, people in Mesoamerica were making ornaments out of it. For example, archaeologists found some very old beads made out of turquoise at the Cholula site in Mexico. They also found turquoise ornaments at the Teotihuacan site. And although there isn't any evidence that either of these sites had contact with anyone north of the Gila River in Arizona, they do have some pretty good evidence to suggest that the people who lived there knew about the turquoise to the north and probably traded for it. And they have two main pieces of evidence. First is that the ornaments and beads made from the turquoise are not actually from the area. It's likely that someone brought them from somewhere else. Second is that they date back much further than the local cultures would have been able to use the stone themselves. In both cases, the turquoise used by these Mesoamerican cultures seems to have come from the same place as the turquoise that the Pueblo people used more than 1,000 years later. And if you want to know where that is, you need to look at the geologic map of North America. There are only 3 places where this type of turquoise can be mined in the entire continent, and none of them are anywhere near Mesoamerica. They're all up here in the Four Corners region of the United States. The only way to get turquoise from the American Southwest to Mesoamerica is to go overland. And since the cultures down there predate the Pueblo cultures, they would have had contact with someone else who got the turquoise from the southwest and then traded it to them. That could have been the Hohokam, or some other culture we don't know about. Now, it's important to remember that just because something was traded from the southwest to Mesoamerica doesn't necessarily mean that the people of the southwest had direct contact with Mesoamerica. There could have been several middlemen between them. But at the very least, it shows us that trade networks stretched farther than we once thought. And this brings us back to the idea of megacultures. Because if the cultures of the southwest were trading with the Mesoamerican cultures, then that means they're part of the same cultural group. After all, culture is spread through contact. And without contact, cultures stay separate. Now, obviously, these Mesoamerican cultures predate the cultures of the Southwest by several centuries. So if they're part of the same cultural group, then that means that the culture of the Southwest evolved from the cultures down south. Maybe that's why we see so many similarities between the artifacts and artwork of these two regions. And maybe that's why the linguistic groups seem to be related. But hold on a minute. If the ancestral Pueblans came from Mesoamerica, then where did the people of Mesoamerica go? Did they just disappear? No, of course not. Stay tuned to find out what happened to them in Chapter 7. Number 4. Cacao. If you live in the Western world, chances are you enjoy chocolate now and then. And if that's true, then you have the ancient Mesoamericans to thank for that. Chocolate was first used as a drink by the Olmec, as early as 1500 BC. And they passed the tradition on to the Maya and the Aztec. But during the time that these cultures were using cacao, there were people hundreds of miles away in the US Southwest who were also using it. For example, archaeologists have found small quantities of cacao residue in ancient vessels that date back to 300 AD. This is pretty surprising, because there is no way that the people in the Southwest could have grown cacao themselves. Cacao grows naturally only in a small area around the equator in Central America. So where did the Southwestern people get their cacao? Well, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information about that. But whatever the case may be, it's pretty clear that the people who lived in the US Southwest were consuming cacao at the same time as the people in Mesoamerica. That suggests that trade or communication routes connected the two regions, and it gives us a hint as to which direction the ancestors of the Pueblo peoples came from. And that brings us right back to the idea of a megaculture. Because if the people in the Southwest were using cacao at the same time as the Mesoamericans, then that means they were part of the same cultural group. After all, it's not likely that two completely separate groups of people would have started using cacao at the exact same time, unless, of course, one group learned it from the other. But if that's true, then which one taught the other? Well, if we look at the timeline of cacao use, it looks like the people in the Southwest learned about cacao from Mesoamerica. Cacao was first used in the US Southwest during the classic Maya period, when there was a lot of interaction going on between the two regions. We have evidence of that interaction in the form of trade goods. For example, we know that seashells were collected along the Gulf Coast of Mexico and traded all the way north to the US Southwest. In fact, we've found giant piles of whelk and Kona shells at sites like ancestral Puebloan sites, like Chaco Canyon. Some of these shells are 2,000 miles away from Chaco Canyon. And that's as the crow flies. If you wanted to trade them to Chaco Canyon by traveling on foot, it would take you nearly a year to get there. And that wasn't the only thing being traded north and south. Macaws were also getting in on the action. Macaws live in tropical environments in Mexico and Central America. But we've found their bones at sites as far away as the American Southwest and even Alaska. Some scholars believe that these macaws were domesticated and kept as pets, while others think that they were simply captured in the wild and sold as a luxury item. Either way, their bones tell us that the people who lived in the Southwest had access to exotic animals from Mesoamerica, and what went north could have just as easily gone south. So if the people in the Southwest were trading with Mesoamerica, then that means they're part of the same cultural group. And if they're part of the same cultural group, then it makes sense that the ancestral Puebloans moved south into the Four Corners region. That is, after all, the closest area to Mesoamerica that has the natural resources needed to support large populations of sedentary agriculturalists. So we have turquoise, we have cacao, we have seashells and macaws. All of these suggest that trade networks and cultural exchange existed between Mesoamerica and the US Southwest, and that they were closely connected culturally. It might be more accurate to talk about a single megaculture rather than to separate cultures. Because if these two regions were closely connected, then what about the cultures in between? To learn more about those cultures, stay tuned for Chapter 6 Mogollon, Hohokam, and the classic Maya. And remember, these videos are brought to you by a university. Their mission is to make college affordable for everyone. Chapter 6 Pathways through the desert and mountains. Before there were roads, there were pathways. Long before there were paved highways, there were overland trails that linked distant Native American cultures through thousands of years. The ancestors of the modern Hopi people lived in villages in what is now Arizona, some 200 miles away from the coast. Yet archaeologists have found evidence that they traded with the people who lived by the sea. How did they do it? Probably along one of the many river routes that snaked through the mountains and across the desert. There are even clues that tell us there may have been seagoing vessels navigating the Gulf of Mexico, bringing shells and other treasures from far away. This is a journey that we're going to take today. We will travel the way that ancient traders might have, carefully making our way through the canyons and over the mesas on foot. It's me. Welcome to my channel. The desert can seem like an endless expanse of sand dunes and windblown mesas. But if you look closely, you can see a path through this harsh landscape. That's because throughout history, travelers have forged routes through the desert, following washes or arroyos that channeled water across the landscape. These routes weren't always easy to follow, as we'll soon discover, but they did offer the best chance of survival in such a dry environment. Our story begins in the village of Awatovi, tucked away high up in the forested mountains of northeastern Arizona. In pre-Columbian times, the Hopi people farmed the land here, raising corn, beans, and squash. They also hunted deer and other animals for food, and at their disposal, they had plenty of wood to make tools and homes out of. But one thing they didn't have was access to the sea. The ocean seemed a world away. Archaeologists believe that these mountain-dwelling Hohokam ancestors traded with the people who lived closer to the coast, including the Hohokam culture near what is now Phoenix and the ancestral Pueblones along the Cacao Canyon. These societies were hundreds of miles apart, separated by rugged terrain and scorching heat. But they had a lot to gain by trading with each other. The coastal groups had access to fish and marine resources, while the mountain people could provide them with things like turquoise and wood. Today, we know that these far-flung cultures interacted because archaeologists have found distinctive pottery from each group in the other's territory. For example, at the site of an ancient Puebloan great house called Chetro Kettle, researchers found bowls and other ceramics made by the Hohokam. Meanwhile, Hohokam settlements have yielded Puebloan bowls decorated with petroglyphs or rock art. But how these items got from one place to another is something that has fascinated archaeologists for decades. For much of the western United States, the nearest ocean is more than 100 miles away. There were no boats or ships to carry goods across such vast distances, especially not across the hot and arid desert. So it seems likely that whatever goods were traded between these cultures were carried by human hands. But how could a handful of people carry enough supplies to sustain a long journey across such challenging terrain? The answer, as it turns out, is that they didn't do it all at once. The trips would have taken weeks, months, even years to complete. And instead of a few people carrying everything at once, several individuals would participate in the journey, passing off goods at way stations along the way. This means that archaeologists have yet found any single trail that connects the sea to the ancestral Puebloan villages. The longest unbroken distance that an average person can carry a load is about 30 miles. So it seems that traders would have set out in small groups, walking carefully across the desert, never straying too far from the available water. They would stop when the sun beat down hottest and rest in the shade of a rock formation, or perhaps wait until nightfall before continuing on. Even so, some parts of the trip would have been nearly impossible to traverse during the day. And so the traders would have spent the night in places like this cave in northern Arizona, tucked away in a cool, dark recess. It would have provided welcome relief from the harsh desert sun. The cave also would have been a safe place to store goods during the night. When traveling in such small groups, protection from bandits or rival tribes would have been important. At some point, they would reach the next way station, where more supplies awaited them. These way stations would have been located in places where the terrain was too difficult to navigate and where water was available. Sometimes the stations would have been shared with other travelers, while at other times, only traders would have known about them. But what exactly did the traders bring with them on these journeys? One popular item was a type of pottery that was prized by both the mountain people and those who lived closer to the coast. The ancestral Puebloans crafted large jars decorated with painted geometric designs. Meanwhile, the Hohokam produced smaller bowls, and plates made from a distinctive chocolate-colored clay. These items wouldn't have taken up much room at a way station, but they would have been highly prized by the people who received them. Turquoise would have been another sought-after item. This beautiful blue-green stone was mined in the mountains of what is now New Mexico and Arizona, and was prized by many Native American cultures. Small pieces of turquoise could have been strung together into necklaces or bracelets, or they could have been set into larger pieces of jewelry. Because of its rarity, turquoise likely held great value and would have been worth a long journey to acquire. Finally, there were items that couldn't be carried in a pack or on a person's back. For example, archaeologists have found evidence that the Hohokam used pack animals like dogs to help transport goods. Meanwhile, the ancestral Pueblones kept domesticated turkeys, which could have been roasted and eaten by travelers along the way. These types of exchanges not only provided necessary goods, but also helped spread cultural knowledge between different groups of Native Americans. In fact, it was through trade that the ancestral Pueblones learned how to cultivate maize or corn. Originally domesticated in what is now Mexico, maize eventually made its way north into the Four Corners region. Archaeological evidence suggests that the ancestral Pueblones adopted farming techniques from the Hohokam around the year 400 CE, and it's possible that trade played a role in spreading other technologies. As we continue our journey through the desert, we come across yet another obstacle, a wide river blocking our path. But with careful planning, we can find a way across. Some rivers could be crossed in a canoe or other small boat, but at least some Native Americans developed other ingenious ways of getting across flowing water. The best example of this is the White Mountain Apache travel raft, which was crafted from the logs of dead trees that littered the forest floor. These rafts were so well made that they could carry loads of up to 2 tons, likely helping the White Mountain Apache and other indigenous peoples travel the waterways of the region. Eventually, our journey takes us out of the forested mountains and onto the dry, open desert. These formations are made of harder rock that has resisted erosion, creating natural landmarks that can help guide us on our way. But it's not just the physical features of the desert that have helped humans traverse this seemingly endless expanse. Along our route, we encounter petroglyphs, or rock art left behind by previous travelers. Some of these date back thousands of years, and may depict animals, plants, and even humans engaged in everyday tasks. These markings are more than just pictures. They're messages meant to help guide us along the way. But why would ancient traders need guidance in such an open area? During a storm, the dry and dusty landscape quickly turns into a muddy mess that can trap unwary travelers. Flash floods can appear suddenly and without warning, rushing through the dry washes and sweeping everything before them. That's why even today, it's a good idea to check the weather forecast before crossing the desert. If rain is in the forecast, it's best to wait until it passes before attempting to cross the washes. But the ancient traders didn't have a weather app to check, so they relied on other methods of predicting storms. They may have looked for telltale signs in the sky, such as dark clouds or flashes of lightning, or they may have listened for distant thunder. Once they did see or hear a storm approaching, they would have needed to scramble for higher ground. They often contain debris that can knock a person off their feet, and the swift-moving water can pull even the strongest swimmer under. When faced with a raging torrent, it's best to get out of its path as quickly as possible. If there's nowhere to hide from the rushing water, then it's time to drop to the ground and protect your head. By lying face down and covering your head with your arms, you can protect yourself from being swept away. But even if you manage to survive the initial impact of the flash flood, there's still danger lurking. After the water recedes, it can leave behind a thick layer of mud that can trap a person up to their knees or even waist. Getting stuck in the mud can be exhausting, and it can also be dangerous. If the sun comes out, it can quickly become hot enough to cause heat stroke or even death. That's why if you ever find yourself traveling through the desert, it's important to be prepared. Have plenty of water with you and be aware of the signs of a flash flood. And if you're lucky enough to travel with a group, make sure to keep an eye on each other. If one person gets exhausted or injured, the others can help carry their load. With careful planning and a little bit of luck, you can successfully navigate the desert and all of its challenges. Now it's time to continue our journey through the desert and over the mountains. Along the way, we'll need to find new routes around obstacles, like dry washes and rocky terrain. But with each step, we'll learn more about the ancient traders who came before us and the incredible journeys they undertook to bring goods from the coast to the mountains. Will you join us as we explore the ancient trade routes and discover the secrets of the desert? Click below to subscribe and join our journey today. See you next time. Chapter 7. The exchange of ideas. We are at the end of the second millennium BC now, and for several centuries, there has been a steady flow of copper and other goods traveling up the coast from Mesoamerica into the American Southwest. But what if that's not all that was being traded? What if ideas were also traveling north alongside the goods? Ideas about religion and cosmology and urban design. And what if those ideas took root and flourished in ways that changed the course of North American prehistory? That's what we're going to explore today on this channel. It's me. Welcome to the series Ancient North America. The Mississippian culture emerged in the American bottom around 800 AD, but it quickly spread outward across the lowlands of the Mississippi River and its tributaries. By 1000 AD, it had become one of the largest, most widespread and densely populated cultures in pre-Columbian North America. Their political units called chiefdoms contained anywhere from 500 to several thousand people and were ruled over by a hereditary elite, who monopolized access to resources and directed labor into monumental construction projects, like the Great Platform Mound at Cahokia, which rose 100 feet, or 30 meters high, with a flat summit, that could be used for ball games, religious ceremonies, or as a base for elite residences. But while archaeologists have been able to document many aspects of Mississippian life, including their impressive knowledge of astronomy, their social organization, and even some details of their religious beliefs, it's as hard to know exactly where these ideas came from. Because despite the ubiquity of the Mississippian culture, their written language is completely undeciphered, and thus their historical records are a mystery. However, their material culture shows clear signs of having traveled south from Mexico. For example, the iconic ceramic vessel of the Mississippian culture is the effigy bowl, a large earthenware pot shaped like an animal's head. The earliest examples are from the Puebla, Panuco region of Mexico, dating back to 400 BC, but later examples from the classic Maya period show a much wider range of effigy forms, especially birds and fantastic creatures with elongated snouts and multiple sets of appendages. And suddenly those same fantastic creatures start appearing on Mississippian effigy bowls, starting around 800 AD, just after the classic Maya civilization collapsed. This makes it seem likely that Mississippian artists either migrated to the south and picked up the style directly from Maya potters, or that Mississippian potters got the idea from Maya ceramics, circulating in trade. Either way, there is no way that they would have come up with such an advanced and sophisticated style independently, without having seen the ceramics that inspired them. But that's not the only piece of evidence pointing to a southern origin for the Mississippian culture. We can also see the influence of classic Maya architecture in the design of their platform mounds, which served multiple functions in Mississippian society, just as they did in the Maya. For example, at Angel Mounds, the principal mound rises behind a wide stairway that leads up onto a flat summit. In both cases, the stairway is offset to one side of the structure, so that it appears to be floating on the mound, like a raft on water. But the similarities go deeper than that, because when archaeologists excavated the mound at Angel, they found that the stairway was deliberately placed to align with the cardinal directions. And just as in the Maya, the platform mound was surrounded by 4 subsidiary mounds that formed a square around it, creating a sacred precinct aligned with the constellation of the Milky Way. And speaking of the cosmos, the Maya were expert astronomers who kept detailed records of comets and other celestial visitors. They even used their knowledge of the skies to predict the movements of the planets, Venus in particular. And many archaeologists believe that they passed on this knowledge to the people of the American bottom when they migrated north. If true, then the Maya would not be the only Mesoamerican culture to influence North American religious practices. The Hopewell culture flourished in the Ohio River Valley from about 200 BC to 500 AD, and it's best known for the geometric earthworks that they built across the landscape. Some, like the Great Circle at Newark earthworks, were clearly used for astronomical observation, and others, like the Octagon at the Hopewell Culture National Historical Park, were probably used for religious rituals. But while their structures look impressive, there's nothing particularly unique or mysterious about them. They aren't pyramids, and they weren't built by an unknown people who vanished. The Hopewell people themselves constructed them as part of a long-lasting tradition of mound building that goes back thousands of years in North America. What is more mysterious is the sudden appearance of Hopewell material culture in the archaeological record, because their distinctive pottery, jewelry, and other artifacts show clear signs of having traveled south from Mesoamerica. For example, the distinctive shell-tempered pottery of the Hopewell culture has clear parallels with ceramics from the Mexican state of Puebla, which archaeologists date to the same time period. And this is important because it shows that Mesoamerican cultural influence was present in the Ohio Valley before the Maya even existed. So it seems likely that whatever cultural group was living in the Ohio Valley at the time was directly descended from the Maya, but instead had independently adopted many of their religious ideas through trade and cultural exchange. This is supported by the discovery of Maya-style polychrome ceramics in Florida, Georgia, and even Illinois, indicating that Mesoamerican goods traveled far and wide across North America. And when archaeologists discovered Hopewell-style artifacts in the Maya city of Tikal, it seemed clear that the two cultures had been directly connected through trade. But it's hard to say exactly what was exchanged. Was it ideas, goods, people, or all three? Well, recently, a team of archaeologists investigated this question by analyzing the chemical composition of the clay used in Hopewell ceramics. They wanted to see if the clay was locally sourced, or if it had been imported from somewhere else. And what they found was that the clay used in Hopewell ceramics was almost identical to the clay found in the Puebla-Panuco region of Mexico, indicating that the material was imported south to North America rather than being locally sourced. But this doesn't tell us why. Why would the Maya send so much clay to North America? Well, perhaps it was simply an unintended consequence of trade. After all, the main reason that the Maya would have been trading with northern cultures would be to acquire exotic goods like obsidian and copper, which were not available in Mesoamerica. And if those goods were being transported on boats down the coast, then it's likely that some clay would have been inadvertently brought along for the ride. However, it's possible that the presence of Maya traders in North America is evidence of something more deliberate, like an attempt to convert northern cultures to Maya religion. And this wouldn't be unprecedented in Mesoamerica. For example, the classic Maya expanded rapidly during the late pre-classic period, which saw a dramatic increase in population, trade, and cultural influence. And archaeologists think that this growth may have been driven in part by the adoption of the Maya writing system by neighboring cultures. So it's not inconceivable that Maya merchants traveling to the north would have tried to convert local populations to their religion in exchange for raw materials. And that would explain why certain religious ideas from Mesoamerica took root so easily in the north. There was already a cultural infrastructure in place to support them. But ultimately, we can't really know the motivations of ancient traders, unless we can decipher their writing system, which we can't. So we can only speculate. In the end, it seems likely that ideas flowed across the landscape of ancient North America in much the same way that they do today. Like water, ideas find the easiest path to flow along. They travel most quickly when they're carried on a well-established trade route, and they spread most easily when they're adapted to local conditions. Just think of all the languages that exist in the world today that are descended from Proto-Indo-European, the common ancestor of modern English, Hindi, Spanish, Latin, and Russian. Over the past few millennia, speakers of Proto-Indo-European migrated across Eurasia and eventually gave rise to hundreds of different languages that vary widely from one another. But they all share a common origin. And in the same way, the religious beliefs and architectural traditions of Mesoamerica found fertile ground in the American South and eventually took on new life in North America. And while we will never know exactly how this happened, the evidence is clear that this kind of cultural exchange was a normal feature of pre-Columbian life in the Americas. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a comment below to let me know what you thought. And if you want to learn more about ancient North America, click here to grab a copy of The First Americans, a book that explores the fascinating evidence for an earlier and more complex prehistory in North America than many people realize. In Chapter 7, we discussed how a number of archaeological finds have brought the origins of the Maya civilization into the realm of the possible, showing a clear link between the ancient classic Maya and the contemporary classic civilizations of the North. But not all scholars are convinced. In this chapter, we'll see why. Hi everyone, this is the host. I hope you're well. Today, we continue our journey back through time to the dawn of the Maya civilization in the pre-classic period, specifically looking at the debate among some archaeologists about whether or not the Maya had contact with advanced civilizations to their north. We've been working our way through the centuries leading up to the Maya civilization, watching as they gradually adopted new technologies from the cultures around them. And in Chapter 7, we saw some new evidence that showed a very clear link between the Maya and the neighboring cultures of the north. The pottery style, known as sisak, ceramic figurines made in the same style as those found in the north. Even depictions of the feathered serpent deity found on Maya monuments. These were all strong pieces of evidence for a cultural exchange between the two regions. But it appears some archaeologists are not ready to accept that the Maya had direct contact with the advanced civilizations to their north. Instead, these skeptics suggest that any similarities between the two cultures could have been due to trade through intermediaries. So what are the arguments for and against? Let's take a look. We don't have to go far to find an argument against the evidence presented in Chapter 7. It can be found right next door in the neighboring country of Belize. Right across the border from the Maya area of the Yucatan, we meet Dr. Jaime Yo, director of the Archaeology Department at the University of Belize. In an article published in Archaeology magazine, Dr. Ao argues that the Tizoc pottery found at Maya sites like El Pilar and the early figurines found at the site of Baking, which seem to show a connection to the Olmec and other northern cultures, could have arrived there via middlemen. According to Dr. Au, there is nothing at either site dating to a time before 200 BC. He suggests that the items must have been traded down from the north by groups who were in contact with the classic Maya, such as the Itza or the Keish. It seems likely that these groups were more open to outside influences than the more isolated Maya kingdoms further south. According to Dr. O, this would explain the appearance of objects in the Maya area that bear the hallmarks of the neighboring cultures. For example, the Tizoc pottery found at El Pilar might have come from the Huaca collective, a loose confederation of groups along the Sierra de las Minas and the Paloquic River in modern-day Guatemala and Belize. Their territory was in the center of a network of trade that connected them to both the northern and southern regions. They would have been in a good position to acquire these goods and then trade them further south into Maya territory. As for the ceramic figurines, Dr. O notes that they could have been acquired by the Maya from Itza traders. The Itza controlled important trade routes in the southern lowlands and had access to both the classic Maya and the classic civilizations of the north. So according to Dr. O.H., instead of a direct connection, the more likely scenario is that the Maya were exposed to these northern influences secondhand. Dr. Og goes on to cite linguistic evidence that supports his theory. He points out that loanwords associated with ritual and religion make up a larger percentage of early post-classic Maya vocabulary, suggesting that the Itza played a role in transmitting cultural traits, including religious ideas, to the Maya. In addition, he cites historical accounts that describe how the Maya adopted certain customs and beliefs from their neighbors, lending credence to his theory that outside influences, including those from the north, reached the Maya through intermediaries. But there are others who argue that the connections between the Maya and the advanced civilizations to the north are simply too strong to ignore. One of these scholars is Dr. Simon Martin, Professor Emeritus of Anthropology at Pennsylvania State University. He has carried out extensive fieldwork in the Maya area and has done much to advance our understanding of the early Maya. In a paper delivered at the 2016 meeting of the Society for American Archaeology, Dr. Martin argued that the idea that the Maya got their knowledge from middlemen ignores the facts. He pointed out that if the Tizoc pottery and other objects had been traded down from the north, we should expect to find them at sites closer to the border first. But that's not what the archaeological record shows. On the contrary, some of the earliest examples of Tizoc pottery have been found deep in the Maya area, at sites like El Pilar and La Corona. As for the ceramic figurines, the closest parallels to the Maya figurines come from the Olmec heartland, and not from sites further south. In addition, Dr. Martin noted that the Olmec headdress found at El Pilar and other early Maya sites has no parallel anywhere else in Mesoamerica. This suggests that it came directly from the Olmec, and not from a secondary source. So according to Dr. Martin, the idea that the Maya acquired their knowledge from middlemen doesn't hold up to scrutiny. He argued that the evidence is clear that the Maya had direct contact with the Olmec and other northern cultures, and that this contact was probably both cultural and ethnic. So who's right? Well, as with many things in archaeology, the answer is probably somewhere in between. It's quite possible that some cultural traits, such as religious ideas, entered the Maya area through middlemen, such as the Itza, while other traits such as the Olmec headdress came directly from the north. Ultimately, without more evidence, we can't say for sure. But here's the thing, maybe we don't need to have all the answers. Maybe part of the charm of archaeology is that there are still so many unanswered questions. Who knows? Maybe one day someone will find even more evidence to shed light on this fascinating period of prehistory. But until then, we can appreciate the mystery and marvel at the ingenuity of the ancient Maya as they emerged from the tropical forests of Central America fully formed. ready to build great cities and create a thriving civilization. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more episodes as we continue to explore the secrets of the ancient Maya. Also, be sure to check out the support page to learn how you can support the production of these videos. Until next time, I wish you all the best. Bye. Alright, we're back to the present day. Time for chapter 9, which is going to be one of those chapters where we use our imaginations and try to get into the mind of a person who lived in the ancient Maya area. Specifically what we think a trader might have experienced during their travels. And before we get started, don't forget to check out our support page if you haven't already. Alright, let's do this thing. It is not a long journey that Itzum takes. He doesn't cross any mountains or big rivers. There are no dangerous animals to avoid on his way north. In fact, it is such a peaceful trip that he has time to look at the clouds and imagine what they might be, how they might be spirits floating by, or maybe even gods. Sometimes, when he gets bored of looking at the sky, he looks at the bundles that he is carrying on his back. They aren't very heavy, and their shape doesn't change while he walks, so there is nothing to adjust. Itzum makes sure to walk near the edge of the road, so that the dust of passing merchants doesn't cover him in dirt. He isn't bothered by insects. Sure, there are some biting ants along the way, but mostly the only sounds he hears are the wind in the trees and the birds singing in them. Occasionally, a troop of monkeys will chatter at him from the branches, but Itzum just waves to them and keeps walking. He is wearing a comfortable tunic made of cotton that is almost like a second skin. It is a simple garment with no embellishments, but Itzum feels good in it. He ties his sandals with leather thongs and adjusts his square woven carrying cloth. In his right hand, he holds a wooden walking stick and uses it to help steady himself as he goes up small hills. His sandals are new, so he slows down his pace so that he doesn't wear them out too quickly. Sometimes Itzum stops to pick up a stone that has been worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. He flips the stone over and over in his hands and then drops it back onto the path. It is hard to believe that all these people have walked this road before him. Some must have been traders like him, walking north to sell their goods. Others were probably farmers going to the market. Maybe there were soldiers marching to an important battle, and some may have been priests traveling to a sacred site. It's some coup to tell if the people who walk this road often are happy about something or sad about it. They all seem serious, and he doesn't want to interrupt them on their journeys. So he just keeps walking. There are some ruined buildings along the road, but none of them are very impressive. They have fallen apart a long time ago, and nature has reclaimed them. Vines climb up the sides of the crumbling walls, and roots grow between the stones. When the buildings are too far gone to tell what they once were, the local people call them Ka, meaning house, or Puck, meaning snake. Itzum knows better than to go inside them. People disappear inside the old buildings and are never seen again. So he sticks to the road. The road is packed hard by many feet. It isn't wide, so sometimes Itzum has to step off of it to let a family pass by. They usually have a father carrying a load of wood, a mother carrying a baby on her back, and a son and daughter holding each other's hands and skipping along the roadside. Sometimes a dog runs ahead of them or follows behind, and sometimes they stop to collect firewood or to pick fruit from a tree. Itzum sees men and women carrying clay pots on their heads and tall baskets filled with herbs and vegetables. Some of the men have bows and arrows slung across their shoulders, and some of the women wear necklaces of jaguar teeth. Once Itzum sees a man with a parrot on his wrist, and he stops to admire the bird. It reaches up and gently bites his finger, and then the man continues on his way without acknowledging Itzum's greeting. The parrot squawks and flies away. When the sun begins to set, the people along the road start to find places to sleep. Some stay in the shade of the old buildings, while others pitch temporary shelters made of branches and leaves. Itzum keeps walking until he finds a grove of large trees. He leans against the trunk of a kapok tree, folds up his blanket, and lies down. Soon the first stars begin to appear in the sky, and Itzum closes his eyes and falls asleep. In his dreams, he is walking through a forest and sees the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. Her hair is black as night, her skin is the color of ripe maize, and her eyes shine like obsidian mirrors. She looks at him and smiles, and he wakes up feeling refreshed and ready to continue his journey. He doesn't know exactly where he is, but he can see a river in the distance and decides to walk toward it. He thinks there might be a settlement nearby, and he would like to get supplies. Itzum crosses open fields and hilly terrain, and after a while he sees a small village in the distance. As he approaches, he can hear the sounds of people working in the fields. He walks past houses made of wood and thatch, and sees women grinding corn, and children playing. He asks for water, and someone points him to a shaded plaza, with a fountain in the center. While he is drinking, a man with a thick gray beard approaches, and asks him if he needs anything. Itzum says he would like some food, and the man leads him to a house with a thatched roof. Inside, a woman is cooking something delicious, and she gives Itzum a bowl of food. It's hot and tasty, and he eats quickly. The man says he is the village elder, and asks where Itzum is going. The trader tells him that he is heading north, and the elder tells him that he is brave, because there are dangerous things in the forest that can harm him. But Itzum says he is unafraid, and the elder nods his head and goes back to talking with some young boys. After his meal, Itzum asks for directions to the next settlement, and the elder points him toward the east. He thanks the people for their hospitality, and continues on his way. Itzum walks until the sun is high overhead, and then he sits on a nearby rock to rest. He takes out his lunch, which consists of dried meat and tamales, and enjoys the view. He can see a waterfall in the distance, and decides to go investigate. On the way, he passes through a patch of banana plants, and picks one to eat. As he walks, he thinks about his family, and how he can't wait to see them again. He remembers his wife's beautiful smile, and his children's laughter, and feels a surge of love for them. He has been traveling for many months, and misses them terribly. He arrives at the waterfall, and is amazed by its beauty. Water cascades down the rock face, and collects in a pool below. He takes off his sandals and wades into the water. It's cold and refreshing, and he feels invigorated. While he is swimming, he sees a man on the other side of the waterfall, and calls out to him. The man looks back and raises his hand in greeting. Itzum swims to the other side, and introduces himself. They talk for a while, and Itzum learns that the man's name is Yuck, and that he lives in a village nearby. Yuck invites Itzum to come visit, and the two men walk toward Yuck's home together. When they arrive at the village, Yuck's wife greets them with a smile, and offers them food and drink. Itzum accepts, but politely refuses when she offers him a place to sleep. He doesn't feel comfortable sleeping in a place where he is unfamiliar with the customs and traditions. Instead, he sets up his mat and blanket outside the house, and sleeps under the stars. In the morning, Yuck and his family walk with Itzum to the road. They say goodbye, and Itzum continues on his journey. Yuck's village was a small one, but soon he will reach the capital city, and Itzum is looking forward to seeing all of the sights there. He walks down a hill and sees a large building in the distance. As he gets closer, he realizes it is a pyramid. At its base, he can see many people coming and going, and he knows he has reached his destination. He has finished his journey and is ready to trade his wares. And that's it for this episode, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed this softer, more gentle chapter. We wanted to switch things up a bit and give you a glimpse into the daily life of an average Joe living in the ancient Maya area. If you liked this episode, please remember to leave us a like and a comment down below, letting us know what you thought. And if you want to support the channel even further, consider becoming a member where you can watch episodes early, suggest future topics and more. Thanks for joining us on this journey through time, and we'll see you next time for more adventures in ancient history. Okay, now that we've made it to chapter 10, you should know that you are in for a treat, because this is going to be one of the coolest chapters in the course. So buckle up. We're gonna do this. In this chapter, we're going to see how long-distance trade affected the societies of ancient America. And I think you're really gonna like it. If you're ready, give me a holla. Say hooray, let's do this thing. Say it, come on. Say it, come on. Hooray, let's do this thing. Okay, let's get started. Okay, before we dive into this, just a reminder. If you want access to all of our review packets, including our famously fabulous review packet for this very chapter, check the link below. And if you would like to grab a review packet, you can do that there. Also, don't forget that you can subscribe here on YouTube. You can leave comments and questions down below. And if you'd like to ask questions about the videos or the material in the course, you can always email us at the provided email, and we'll be happy to help you out. Alright, let's go. Okay, so let's begin with an essential question. What this trade meant for ancient America. Alright, first of all, let's talk about how this long-distance trade affected the economy of the societies of ancient America. So what I want you to do is pull up your big brains and think about this for a second. What are some things that people in the Andes would want that they didn't have access to? Well, what about salt? People in the Andes didn't really have any access to salt. They lived far from the ocean, and they didn't have the technology to extract salt from seawater yet. What about gold? They weren't really rich in gold in the Andes. They had some, but not a whole lot. But what they did have was a whole bunch of copper. So how might those societies benefit from trade with other societies? Who had access to these things they wanted, but did UNT have access to themselves? Well, by trading them copper for the things they wanted, they could acquire those things. So what you're seeing happen is these societies are using their comparative advantage. So for example, the societies in the Andes, they're like, hey, we got lots of copper, right? So instead of making ornaments out of copper, which we already have plenty of, let's use our copper to get something else that we don't have, like salt or gold. So the point here is that through trade, societies could acquire goods and resources that they didn't have access to otherwise. And that's just one way that this long-distance trade affected the economy of ancient American societies. The next way we need to talk about is how long-distance trade affected the prestige of certain goods and people. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about the fact that in the Inca Empire, the emperor had his capital at Cusco. But when he went to ceremonial centers like Cusco, he rode on a golden throne. That's right, he rode on a golden throne. And that gold, where do you think that came from? It came from the trade with the societies on the coast. The societies on the coast traded him gold for the things that they wanted. And in this case, the emperor used that gold to make an awesome golden throne to ride on in ceremonies. In other words, what this trade did was it created a sort of aura of prestige around certain goods. And those goods then became more important in ceremonies. For example, another good that was important in ceremonies was feathers. People in the Andes didn't have feathers because they didn't live near any coast. There weren't birds there. But through trade, they acquired feathers from societies on the coast. And then they used those feathers to adorn ceremonial garments. And so what you're re-seeing is that long-distance trade created a demand for certain goods in different regions. Those goods were in high demand, so they became more valuable. Those values then trickled down into ceremonial contexts. And so even today, we see how certain things that are rare become associated with power and wealth and importance. It's the same story. Nothing's changed. So you have to understand that this long-distance trade created a demand for certain goods. Those goods then became prestigious and important in ceremonies. And finally, we need to consider how this long-distance trade affected the way people saw themselves and their relationship with other people. So what do I mean by this? Well, let me introduce you to a concept called the exchange of wives. And what this was a type of marriage alliance that was established between two different groups through the gift of a woman. So in this scenario, you have two different groups and one group gives a woman to the other group to marry. And this was a way of establishing an alliance between two groups. And this practice is common in many different cultures throughout the world, but it was also common among the societies of ancient America. Now, what does this have to do with long-distance trade? Well, what you have to realize is that when people participated in long-distance trade, they met new people. When they met new people, sometimes they would establish personal relationships with those people. And sometimes those relationships would lead to marriage. And so you have to think about this. If two people from two different groups got married, what would happen when they went back to their respective villages? Well, they would bring news of the other village. They would tell stories about the people there and the things they did. And over time, that would create a sense of connection and affinity between the two groups. And as those connections multiplied, and as more groups began to connect with each other through trade and marriage, it created a web of alliances across vast distances. And that's exactly what we see in the archaeological record. Through the analysis of DNA and linguistic studies, historians and archaeologists have been able to trace these connections and alliances across vast distances in ancient America. And so this long-distance trade affected the way people saw themselves and their relationship with other people. It created connections and alliances that defied great distances. Now, why does any of this matter? Why should you care about this stuff? Well, you should care about this stuff because it shows you the sophistication of these societies. These societies were sophisticated enough to engage in complex trade networks across vast distances. They were able to build ships capable of crossing the ocean. They were able to create systems of accounting and record-keeping to keep track of all their transactions. And they were able to maintain complex social networks across great distances. And all of that required a high degree of sophistication and organization. And so what you need to take away from this is that these societies were incredibly sophisticated. And we need to appreciate the complexity and nuance of the cultures of ancient America. Okay, I hope that helped. And may I also remind you to visit our website for more goodies. You'll find review packets and review videos and all kinds of cool stuff there. If you want to get a review packet, we've got them there for you. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can do that there as well. Alright, signing out. The air is thick with anticipation. A crowd has gathered around the edge of the plaza, eyes fixed on the procession before them. At the center is a young man who has just returned from a long journey. He walks slowly, bearing the weight of what he carries, not just on his shoulders but in his heart. In his hands, he holds two objects, both unassuming, yet they symbolize worlds apart and the threads that connect them. A piece of rock crystal and a small clay pot. Where did these objects come from? How did they travel all this way? And how does their story connect to yours? These are some of the questions we'll explore in Chapter 11, The Long Threads of Connection. As you think about this chapter, consider the big ideas. What patterns of exchange connected the Maya with other peoples? What impact did these connections have on the development of Maya civilization? And how do similar patterns of trade, travel, and cultural blending continue to shape our world today? Imagine for a moment that you're one of the people gathered around the edge of the plaza. You've heard rumors about the young man's journey and what he might bring back. As he stops before the altar at the center of the plaza, he begins to tell the story of his travels. His journey began many months earlier, when he set out with a group of merchants from his home city. Their destination was far to the north, a place known as the Southwest, where the land is dry and the people are different, speaking a different language and worshipping different gods. But despite the differences, there was something that united them, a shared love of beautiful things. The people of the Southwest were renowned for their skill in crafting turquoise jewelry, and the merchants hoped to acquire some of the finest pieces to sell in the Maya city. The journey itself was fraught with danger. There were bandits to avoid and treacherous mountain passes to navigate. But finally, they arrived at their destination. The city of the Southwest was unlike any place the young man had ever seen. The houses were made of stone, and the streets were filled with merchants from all over the known world. There were people from the north, from the east, across the sea, and even from the south, where the great Maya kings held court. It was a place where the borders between cultures were blurred and new ideas were born. Here, the young man saw things that sparked his wonder and curiosity. In the markets, he saw cacao beans from the distant lands to the west, and in the homes of the wealthy, he saw feathers from birds that could only be found in the mountains to the north. Everywhere he went, he heard different languages and saw people with different customs. But he also saw the common threads that bound them together, the shared love of beauty and the desire for trade. It was here, in this melting pot of cultures, that the young man acquired the two objects that now rested in his hands, the piece of rock crystal and the small clay pot. They were small and unassuming, yet they symbolized the vast network of exchange that connected the Maya with other peoples. In the coming years, as the young man continued to travel, he would see these objects become powerful symbols of his own identity. The piece of rock crystal reminded him of the harsh beauty of the northern mountains, while the small clay pot reminded him of the vibrant culture of the Southwest. They were more than just souvenirs or trade goods. They were tangible reminders of the world's vastness and the interconnectedness of all people. He told the crowd about the merchants who traveled between cities, carrying not just goods but also ideas and stories. The merchants would return home with new ideas for art and new techniques for trade. For example, the Maya learned how to make exquisite feather ornaments by watching the Aztecs. This style of ornament was so intricate and beautiful that the nobles loved it, and the demand for it never faded. The merchants also brought back new tools, such as the steel-tipped spear point, which helped the Maya become even more effective hunters. And then there were the travelers, like the young man, explorers and adventurers, who journeyed for different reasons, but who also played an important role in connecting the Maya with the outside world. Some of these travelers were priests who went in search of wisdom and knowledge. Others were nobles who sought to expand their power and influence. And some were simply curious about the world beyond their borders. But it wasn't just material goods or ideas that flowed through this network of exchange. People, too, were constantly on the move. Many of them were slaves who were captured in warfare or sold by their parents to pay debts. Others were prisoners who had been exiled from their home cities. And still others were simply looking for a better life. For the Maya, this contact with the outside world was both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it brought new wealth, new ideas, and new experiences. On the other hand, it also brought new diseases and new conflicts. For instance, the Maya had no immunity to the diseases that were common in the Southwest, and many people died as a result. and the competition for resources between the Maya and the people of the Southwest was fierce. There were constant battles over land and water rights, and the Maya often found themselves on the losing side. Despite these challenges, the Maya continued to reach out beyond their borders. They built great roads and causeways that connected their cities with those of their neighbors. They established trading posts as far away as the Gulf Coast and the Pacific Ocean, and they sent embassies to the courts of distant kings. The young man concluded his tale. The crowd was silent for a moment, each person lost in thought. The story of the merchantess' journey had opened their eyes to the world's vastness and the interconnectedness of all people. The Maya were not just a small, isolated civilization. They were part of a much bigger picture. The ancient Maya understood this connection to other cultures, drawing strength and inspiration from the diversity of the world. They incorporated new ideas into their own traditions, creating a unique blend of cultures that was truly their own. The Maya were not afraid to reach out beyond their borders. They knew that the world was big enough for all of them, and that there was much to be gained by connecting with other cultures. They embraced diversity and were willing to learn from other civilizations, incorporating new ideas and innovations into their own society. The ancient Maya were also skilled traders and merchants, and they established extensive trade networks that connected them with other cultures. Through trade, the Maya acquired new goods and resources that were not available in their home territory. They also developed new technologies and innovations that spread to other cultures through their trade networks. So what does this mean for us today? As we think about the ancient Maya and their connections to other cultures, we can learn some valuable lessons about the importance of diversity, trade, and cultural exchange. We live in an increasingly interconnected world, and it's important to remember that we are all part of a much bigger community. The ancient Maya were not just a small, isolated civilization, but rather an integral part of a vast network of cultures that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. They embraced diversity and were willing to learn from other cultures, incorporating new ideas and innovations into their own society. They also understood the importance of trade and established extensive trade networks that connected them with other cultures. If you want to learn more about the ancient Maya and their connections to other cultures, I encourage you to do further research. You can read books, watch documentaries, and explore museums to learn more about this fascinating civilization and their legacy. You can also learn about the indigenous cultures of your own region and the ways in which they have influenced your history and culture. By learning about the diversity of cultures that make up our world, we can gain a deeper appreciation for the richness of human history and the interconnectedness of all people. So what are your thoughts on this chapter? What surprised you the most? What do you think the Maya would think about our world today? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more educational content. Until next time, keep exploring the world and all its wonders. In this chapter, we're going to wrap up our discussion of Barry Fell's controversial book, America BC, which argues for widespread trade among ancient Mesoamerican cultures. If you haven't already, I highly recommend reading Chapter 12. And if you are listening to this as a podcast, then we strongly encourage you to check out the show notes, where you can find a link to purchase the book as well as a transcript of this episode. But now let's recap what was covered in Chapter 12. Here we go. We begin by examining the incredible range of goods produced by the ancient Maya. Their craftspeople created obsidian mirrors, intricately carved jewelry made from bone or jade, pottery decorated with fine murals, featherwork ornaments, wooden toys, cotton textiles, and more. Then we discussed how far these goods traveled, ending up as far away as the Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, and even on the west coast of Africa. This is why Barry Fell believes that there must have been some kind of extensive trading network connecting these distant regions. Next, we looked at figurines from the US Southwest that bear an uncanny resemblance to Maya-style ceramics. We also examined petroglyphs, showing horned people and other imagery found throughout the Southwest and in the American Southeast that seemed to parallel Maya art and mythology. Then in Part 3, we saw how similarities between the Maya and Native American cultures extend beyond art and into language too. There are hundreds of Maya loanwords found in Native American languages that were likely the result of centuries of cultural exchange. And finally, in Part 4, we explored the fascinating theory that the Maya had actual contact with the US Southwest. There are several pieces of evidence supporting this idea. First, Maya-style pottery has been found at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. Second, There are rock art sites in Arizona featuring petroglyphs that look like they could have been made by Olmec artists. And third, there are a number of archaeological sites in the American Southwest that show clear evidence of Maya influence. This includes structures like the Tower of the Winds, the Great Kiva at Cacao Canyon, and the Unfinished Pyramid, to name just a few. So what do you think? Do you think Barry Fell is onto something here? Is it possible that the ancient Maya had widespread contact with cultures throughout the Americas? Or are all of these similarities just the product of coincidence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And now let me leave you with one final thought. It seems unlikely that we will ever have all the answers to the many mysteries of the ancient world. History is full of dead ends and unanswered questions. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's part of what makes history so fascinating. Just consider how many amazing discoveries have been made over the past century alone. Who knows what the future will bring? Perhaps someday someone will uncover physical evidence that sheds light on the relationship between the ancient Maya and the peoples of the US Southwest. Or maybe we'll discover a trove of ancient texts that reveals a previously unknown pre-Columbian history. Until then, the desert still holds its mysteries close. I want to thank you for joining me on this journey through Barry Fell's America, BC. I hope you enjoyed the series. I certainly enjoyed exploring these fascinating ideas with you. And if you learned something new or had your perspective shifted on some of these topics, then that's a win-win in my opinion. I want to end by saying that while Barry Fell's work has been highly influential, it's important to remember that he is just one of many voices in the conversation about ancient history, and it's always a good idea to hear multiple perspectives before forming an opinion. So be sure to explore other resources as well. Read books, watch documentaries, and listen to podcasts that offer different viewpoints and interpretations. That way you can make up your own mind about what happened in ancient times. The more we learn, the more food for thought we have. If you've been enjoying this series, please show your support. Share this episode with a friend, leave a comment below, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also support the production of independent historical content by becoming a patron through the link in the show notes. A special thanks to our supporters, whose names you can see on screen now. And now, let's return to the story of trade, because at the end of the day, that's really what this is about. It's about the story of human connection, of how people from different cultures came together and exchanged not just goods, but ideas, customs, and traditions as well. Think about it. Ancient people didn't just trade pottery and textiles and ornaments. They traded stories and songs and myths and legends. They shared their knowledge of the world around them and passed down their traditions from one generation to the next. And in doing so, they created a rich tapestry of human culture that continues to this day. The ancient Maya were master craftspeople. They created some of the most beautiful and intricate works of art in the ancient world. Their pottery was decorated with stunning murals. Their jewelry was carved from bone or jade with incredible precision. And their textiles were so finely woven, they resembled paintings. All of this took skill, patience, and an eye for detail. But it was more than just a job for the Maya. It was an art form. Each piece of pottery, each piece of jewelry, was a work of art, meant to be admired and treasured. And the very process of creating these goods was a form of cultural expression. It was a way for the Maya to express their creativity and share their unique perspective with the world. But the Maya weren't the only ones with a gift for the arts. As we've seen in previous chapters, the peoples of the US Southwest were equally skilled. Their pottery was just as beautiful as the Mayas, and their jewelry was just as intricate. They too had a deep appreciation for art and a talent for creating exquisite works. What's more, the ancient Maya weren't just traders. They were explorers. They were bold enough to venture out into the unknown in search of new lands and new resources. They sailed across the Caribbean Sea to distant islands and established trade networks that stretched from Cuba to Jamaica. They were curious about the world around them and were unafraid to venture into the unknown to see what was out there. But perhaps most importantly, the ancient Maya weren't just traders. They were innovators. They constantly sought new ways to improve their craft and push the boundaries of what was possible. They developed new techniques for growing crops, making tools, and creating art, and they were always eager to learn from others and share their own knowledge with the world. The ancient Maya are remembered today for their incredible cities, their stunning works of art, and their advanced knowledge of mathematics and astronomy. But what we often forget is that they were also master traders, explorers, and innovators. They were the original global citizens who understood that the world was a vast and interconnected place, and who were willing to explore it to its fullest potential. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. I hope you've enjoyed this series, and that you've learned something new about the ancient world. Remember, the desert still holds its mysteries close, but the story of trade is really the story of human connection. And that's a story worth telling.